Now, one of the biggest stories this week has been the Bank of England's decision to hike those interest rates for a 14th time in a row. It's yet another bid to get inflation under control, and the latest forecasts from the bank say the UK will avoid recession. But was this the right move? Now, joining me now is former Brexit Party MEP Ben Habib and the leader of the SDP, William Clouston. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me on a soggy Saturday afternoon. Now, Ben, I'm going to come to you first. Interest rates, 14 times in a row. Are the Bank of England panicking? Is all of this completely necessary?
Well, I think the Bank of England are bound to get it wrong. We've had, as you say, 14 interest rate rises. And what they haven't done is wait to see what the effect of previous increases in interest rates have been before they go on and make the next increase. And I think one of the things they're failing properly to recognise is that the transmission of them raising interest rates into the economy is actually quite slow nowadays. And that's because, unlike when I was a young man and everyone had variable interest rate mortgages, nowadays people have basically fixed their rates, and fixes maybe between 2 to 5 years, roughly, most people being on 2-year fixes. So it takes a while for increased interest rates to hurt people in their back pockets. And it is on their mortgages that principally increases in interest rates has the impact. And he's gone on raising this before it's been able to be felt by the populace. And he is I don't think he's any longer in danger. I think he is absolutely going to overdo it. The United Kingdom's economy is already teetering, as you said, Dawn, on the edge of a recession. We're without growth, and we are going to experience a recession, and that's going to make things even worse for our economy. And if he thinks that by inducing recession, this is the most daft thing I've heard from Jeremy Hunt, he's almost making it a virtue that we might go into recession as a result of these increases in interest rates. If he thinks going into a recession is going to solve our problems, he's sadly mistaken, because if we go into a recession and the British economy plummets, you may well see sterling also go down, and then you import more inflation, and you get caught in what I think we're already in effect, which is an economic doom loop with inflation embedded, zero growth, and everyone suffering. And what he's failed to do, what Jeremy Hunt has failed to do, what Rishi Sunak has failed to appreciate, and I'm afraid Peter Spencer didn't really pick up on properly in the discussion you had with him, is the government has no vision and no plan to deliver growth for the British economy. The only way out of the problems we face now is growth, and they have no idea how to do it.
William, let's bring you in on this now. Do you think the Bank of England are behaving the right way? 14 interest rate rises in a row. Basic interest rate is now 5.25%, predicted to go to 6%. What do you make of what's happening?
I largely agree with Ben. I think it's a policy mistake based on wrong diagnosis. The economy is already at basically stall speed. So certainly the last two base rate increases are certainly a mistake. Could put the whole economy into a recession, which, as Ben says, would be disastrous. I think they've got the analysis wrong. I mean, the cause of the inflation that we're suffering now is two things, basically. It's a sort of trade shock, which was in the tail effect of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. If you look at commodities prices, oil and gas went through the roof. That's fed through. Actually, if you look at those international prices now, it's stabilized. And the other problem is a long-term domestic supply problem we have, which is, a failure to increase productivity in manufacturing. Housing costs are too much. Transportation is poor, and the rest of it. And a lot of that gets straight back down to government policy, a failure of government policy. So I think it's a mistake. I think the bank is behind the curve, and just like the mess up on the COVID funding bonds, which they've made massive losses on, Bank of England have made yet another mistake.
So, I mean, Ben, coming back to you, what do you make of Grant Shapps' interview this week, where he said, we appreciate it's difficult for people, but we're not actually going to really do anything until possibly just before the next election?
I mean, Grant Shapps is a law unto himself. He chastised Sadiq Khan rightly over ULEZ, but he seems to have forgotten that he wrote a letter to Sadiq Khan in 2020 requiring him to increase the breadth of ULEZ across the entirety of London. Look, the problem with the Conservative Party government is that they've made fighting inflation the top priority in the 5 points that Rishi Sunak's got. And actually, it's not their job to be fighting inflation. That is the Bank of England's job. And they've done it so that they can justify keeping taxes high. They need taxes high because they've already borrowed to the maximum extent that the government can. We've got a debt at a post-World War II high. And so they're keeping taxes high, telling us, which is a lie, by the way, Dawn, telling us that we need high taxes because if we were to cut taxes, we would further fuel inflation. Well, first of all, as I said, it's not their job to be fighting inflation. Second of all, that doesn't make sense because if, for example, you were to reduce tax on fuel, you would reduce inflation. If you were to get rid of green levies on fuel, you would reduce inflation. If you were to reduce VAT, you would reduce inflation. If you reduce stamp duty on housing, you would reduce the cost of housing. Taxation actually, to a very significant extent, embeds inflation and makes it more difficult to fight it. And here's the biggest lie of the lot, and it's this one, that if we reduce income tax rates, somehow we, the British population, having more money in our pockets, will misspend the money and further fuel inflation. The suggestion being that if we hand it over to the government, they'll spend it more wisely and there'll be less inflation. But everyone knows the government is hopeless at spending money wisely. They'd be much better off cutting income taxes for the working and middle classes and letting us use the cash to address the problems that William so well articulated have nothing to do with the battle that the Bank of England is having at the moment. And I just want to say one last thing before I go. The first thing Margaret Thatcher did when she came into office in May 1979 was to cut basic rate of tax and the higher rate of tax because she knew she had to make it pay to work. It was the only way to get growth into the British economy, and she recognized that by growing the economy, she would then have a prosperous United Kingdom and an economy she could manage. And this government hasn't learnt that lesson.
William, what do you make of Mr Shapps' comments that the Tories are expected to wait until next spring budget to cut taxes, and even then it's not a guarantee?
I think it's wishful thinking. I think there's no prospect whatsoever that they'll seriously. They might do something retail politics, something high profile, but there's no prospect at all. Has this government looked at the PSBR, the amount that they have to borrow each year to balance the budget? I mean, we're out of control. PSBR in 22-23 was 130 billion. I can't see any prospect at all with an economy that isn't growing or might fall into recession that they'll be able to cut taxes. This is mere rhetoric. I think, as Ben said, actually, the base problem is that the government hasn't got and hasn't been able to. The Tories have never sorted out a coherent post-Brexit industrial strategy, and I think that's because there are major tensions in the Tory party. The Northern Red Wall MPs would go for something that I would approve of, which is an industrial policy, try and get manufacturing back, try and get a series of policies that actually prioritise manufacturing. The slightly free trade type Knights of the Shires in the South don't want that. So that's an internal problem. They've never been able to resolve this. All you get from the Tories is some rhetoric, you get sort of Singapore on Thames type rhetoric. And I always say when they mention that, I wish they'd go to Singapore and have a look at how a successful social market works. Because that government knows what it's doing. It's got very, very strong housing policies. Its transport infrastructure is excellent. Its health policies work and are cheaper than ours, actually. And altogether it's successful. But it's not based on some sort of ideological free trade purism, which I think has failed. And we've ended up with an economy and a society that's just maxed out on these two major addictions of debt and mass immigration, and we've got to change that.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. I have to say, you haven't really cheered me up that much in any case, and we didn't even have time to get onto the NHS. But that is the other hot topic, isn't it? Thank you very much. That is Ben Habib there, former Brexit Party MEP, and William Clouston, leader of the SDP. Thank you very much for joining me this afternoon. Right, now, you have been getting a busy show. Thank you so much for